Daniel, an HBO miniseries. I get wrapped up in that. Church, good morning. My name's Adam Schaefer. I'm one of the members here with Live in Hope. If I look familiar at all, I might be chasing your kids around downstairs for the either as a small group or a large group leader. It's really cool to see you guys this morning. Internet, it's cool to see you this morning. If you're joining us either now or sometime in the future, welcome. I wonder what the future is like. It's kind of neat. I wonder if some of you might be visiting for the first time this morning. Might be some of you who have been part of this thing since the two churches combined, since Doylestown and Dublin merged. Some of you might have been worshiping God in this very room for decades before right now. So it's neat to think of how Jesus Christ had been the same yesterday, today, and forever, right, this whole time. And that's what this is about. So I'm thankful I get a chance to talk more about this amazing series we've been going through for several weeks now, this book of Daniel, this story of a young man who spends most of his life as a captive. So I want to jump right into it. We're in Daniel chapter 6. If you have a Bible with you, can you flip it open to there? I'm not going to put all the verses up. I'm not really going to put any of the verses up because we're going to kind of fly by for a lot of it and then park at the end where there's this interaction between Daniel and the king. Now, this is the third time this is Daniel's third captive king. If you remember, we'll go back, I'll do this quickly. You go back a couple weeks ago between Elliot and Eugene preaching this series. So Jerusalem was a big deal. It was a powerful city in this period of time, and it got quite literally taken captive. People breached the walls, took over, and steal an entire nation and move them into Babylon, the new biggest, most powerful city in the world. So Daniel's a captive in there. Went through a couple different things that got us to this point, but now, once again, this city has somehow been overthrown. Now, Babylon is no longer Babylon. Now it's become Persia. This was an unhealthy merger. This was not a planned merger. And now Daniel is once again, there's this guy who's a pagan king in a pagan land, and yet something about Daniel connects with this guy. I'll read the first couple verses here. His name is Darius. It says, "It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was one, of whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other presidents and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom." This is the third time this has happened. Daniel gets captured, gets brought into captivity, and this king Nebuchadnezzar, as he tries to kind of find the cream rising to the top of who are the best young promising leaders, Daniel, for whatever reason, was set above them. Nebuchadnezzar ends up getting succeeded by his son Belshazzar, who once again, he gets himself in a mess, and they say, "Who do we call on?" And his wife says, there was a guy who served your father or your grandfather named Daniel. Let's get him in, and he helps him out here. And now we've got Daniel doing this once again. And I wonder, well, let's do this. I'm going to jump to the book of Jeremiah, because there's something that I think is going on here. I do want to put these up on the screen. Daniel was a contemporary with a man named Jeremiah. They got taken captive at the same time. And Jeremiah, speaking on behalf of God to his people, here's what he says, here's what God is saying to you, the men and women who've been taken captive into Babylon. In Jeremiah 29, verse 4, he says this, "Thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I've sent into exile." Can we pause there for a sec? Who I have sent into exile. This wasn't God going, whoops. This wasn't a mistake. This was God's good, right, and perfect will for his people to be taken into captivity. You can chew on that for a second. "Who I've sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon." And here's God's advice to them. "Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives, have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons. Give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease." By the way, what do those things all have in common there? They all take time. Anybody ever tried to garden? Like it is worth going to the produce store. I mean, look, I love my wife dearly, and I'm glad this brings her peace, but I watch her go on our back porch and water and carefully nurture these tomatoes and potatoes, and after 3 months, she's like, "Look, there's a bean." I'm like, Like they're like $1 at Acme, but the point is, like, if you're going to do this and do this well, and God forbid that you're raising children to not just be grown, but then for them to have sons and daughters. So if you're hearing this advice, you're kind of like, yeah, God is with us. He's encouraged. Wait, did you say we're going to be grandparents here? So like this period of time it's not just an overnight lesson that they're learning. Like this is going to be a long-term thing here. But in verse 7, God says, seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. I'm going to get a chance to speak for an entire Sunday morning about this in about a month or so in our Summer Serve series, when we're talking about the difference between what does ministry in our church family look like compared to what does it look like in our community. And I think that is some of the most beautiful words in all. That verse just means the world to me, to seek the welfare of the city where I've sent you into exile. Pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. I got trained to be part of a church planting team years ago, and a man who was one of our coaches, he said, your goal is not to pastor a church. He said, your goal is to pastor a city. Because in the city, you watch God make the city become your church. And I think that all the time. I think that there's so much more that happens with Living Hope than just in this building on Sunday. This is a great place, and I'm glad we're here. But man, folks, most of you are going to be here for 2 hours, right? The other 166 hours, what is God doing in you and through you for you to be given a chance to seek the welfare of the community that we live in, and watch what does God do in you and through you during that time. So why does Darius like Daniel? Well, for starters, Daniel, I believe, is taking these words very seriously. He is seeking the welfare of this community, of this pagan community. The words we've seen so far to describe him: trustworthy, competent, faithful, no error or fault was found in him. But I don't think he was a yes man. In fact, I'm certain he wasn't a yes man. So in the last several weeks, there's been at least, every morning we've preached, there's been at least one thing where he's kind of stood up to the king to some degree, and not necessarily disrespectfully, right? In chapter 1, he rejects the royal diet. He's given a chance to have, if you've been with us, I'll be quick with this. He says no thank you to the food that the king offers. He says, can we try it our way? Gives it a try, it works better, whatever. Chapter 2, the king Nebuchadnezzar needs somebody to interpret his dream. Daniel says, sure, I'll tell it to you. It's about your downfall. Okay, thanks, Mr. Encouragement. So Daniel, but the king is impressed with him, so he says, I'm going to put you up above everybody. Daniel goes, great. I'm going to vouch for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Can I bring them with me? The king goes, sure, they're with you, whatever. So what do Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do? They go all Jesse Owens on Nebuchadnezzar, right? They refuse to bow to the image. They're publicly insubordinate. Okay, great. Good job, Daniel. Chapter 4, what does he do? He tells the king, when the king has another vision or a dream, he tells the king, you need to repent. Chapter 5, new king, Belshazzar. He sees this crazy handwriting on the wall you heard Eugene talk about last week. Daniel goes, oh yeah, you know what that's about? You're too proud. So it's kind of like, yes, he's trustworthy, and I wonder if it's because he will speak the truth in love to the king. Now that being said, now we've got King Darius saying, all right, Daniel, you can be with me. I am fully confident that you are not going to be insubordinate and that you're not going to cause me any headaches. Stay tuned. So the first part of the story, I'm going to call it faithfulness in persecution. So what happens here is the other guys, there's a whole bunch of other people who are local and more regional leaders in Persia here. It's now Persia. And they very quickly, they realize, we've got to get this guy out. It doesn't say clearly why. This is in verse 4. It says, the presidents and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. They could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful. No error was found in him. They said the only way we're going to get him, the only chance we've got, it's got to be his faith. Got to get him with his God. There's got to be some way we can do this. Now, by the way, let's think about this for a second. So Daniel's faith was so evident that they knew that this was an integral part of his life. And yet, he is faithfully serving a pagan king in a pagan country. I think that's important for us to remember if we think that in order to fully serve in something, it needs to be a Christian thing. Daniel respectfully disagrees with you, because he faithfully served the most imperial, the most, we could call it oppressive, right? They literally are taking over countries and just making them their own. And Daniel served these guys, and he was trustworthy, and he was reliable, and he was faithful to them. Why would he do that if he wasn't convinced that God said, regardless of where you are, you seek the welfare of that place, and you bless those people? So why would these guys want him out? Why would these other, he's done nothing but help their country, right? He came in, he's helping. You'd think, you'd be like, that's good, right? So I was talking with Dave Kirkner. He's preaching the same thing up in, it's that way, Dublin. Preaching the same thing this morning. I had to get a compass for a minute there. And we were trying to figure out what could they the problem most likely would have been one of two things, right? It's either just straight up political jealousy. They're ambitious. He got promoted. They want in. Or it's greed. Because if you saw in verse 2, it says, talking about Daniel being over everybody, it says, so that the king might suffer no loss. So I wonder if that's because they were, keeping a little bit on the side, or I don't know. I'll say whatever one of these two reasons it would have been, I think they're both rooted in coveting, right? They're both rooted in wanting something more than just what you have. The 10th commandment, right? The only one that isn't really tangible. All the other commandments, you can kind of say, I beat him up really bad, but I didn't murder, so I'm good. You say, no, I didn't steal, I gave it back. You can say, I didn't lie, I told the truth, whatever. You can kind of check the box and say, I didn't do it. And Paul talks about this in one of his letters to a church. He says, but when I was confronted with coveting, how do you measure that? How do you check the box to say, I wasn't envious, I wasn't lusting, I wasn't wanting more than them? I'm looking at their income and I'm thinking, man, can I get paid like that? I'm looking at their children, I'm thinking, can I please have kids who behave like that? I'm looking at their yard, I'm thinking, why all I have is weeds? I'm looking at whatever the thing is. When we covet, friends, what happens is two things. Number one, we get robbed of our joy. It is impossible to be joyful when you're coveting. But also, it makes it impossible to celebrate others. It's just such an egocentric way to live. And look, it can happen to anybody, at any given moment, at any given time. Church, right now, are either of these things robbing you of your joy? Pause for a minute. Just think about that for a minute. Maybe let God talk to your heart. Are you finding yourself saying, I wish it was like that? Whatever, fill in the blank. Whether it's personal or relational or financial or about your own physical body or whatever. Is your discontent, is it robbing you of your joy? Are you looking at where God has you right now and saying, God, maybe you're not saying this directly, but maybe to some degree you're saying, God, not good enough, big guy. Not good enough. If I was in charge, I would do it like them. It's a very cruel sin, is my point. It's very cruel because then you just can't ever fully be satisfied. So anyhow, the next part of this process here, we'll call it the plot. All right, the plot. So the officials set the trap. By nature, they're politicians or lawyers or whatever. So they've already recognized we're not going to catch this guy with the secretary. All right, he doesn't steal. In fact, he catches us stealing. He makes sure the king doesn't suffer any loss. So how are we going to get him? And they get word of this. This guy prays. And they go, all right, we've got an idea. So how do they get the king? What do they appeal to for the king? His own pride. Well, okay, maybe. I don't know that for sure. That's my best guess. Maybe the king wanted to centralize how they met the needs of the community. I don't know, whatever. But the point is they go to the king. They say, King, we got a great idea. Here's what we should do. Let's do a 30-day trial here of everyone in the kingdom prays to no one or no thing except you. King goes, okay. I am kind of a big deal. After all, I did overtake Babylon, then maybe prayers should be offered to me. And they remind him, they say, because, when we make these laws, right, they are carved in stone. They're serious, right? So you want to do this? And the king goes, sure. And he signs it. And they go, yes. They go, we got him. Now we've got him. Interesting. I was talking to a friend this week who they said, when they went to the king, they said, all the presidents of the kingdom, the prefect, this is in verse 7, all the presidents of the kingdom, all the officials, they all agreed that the king should establish this. Do you think they asked Daniel? I believe that might be a lie. Verse 10, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows and in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed, gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. So it's very interesting that through all those things that we said before, all these things where Daniel has to some degree pushed back or challenged the kings that he served so far, he hasn't actually disobeyed anybody. Right? I mean, he appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego who disobeyed, but just a little hiccup in the relationship. They got over it. This right here, he hears, it says when Daniel heard it, what did he do? He went and he prayed. And I think there's 2 things that are very impactful about this. Number one, like we mentioned earlier, it shows that his commitment to the king, his faith doesn't conflict with the king or seeking his welfare at all, except over idolatry. He says, I can't do that. He says, I cannot and I will not stop praying to my God who's given me the strength to be a captive under you all this time. He said, I won't do it. Will not do it. Now, he doesn't stand in front of the king and say, you're an idiot. He goes to his private place and he does it. It was with an open window towards Jerusalem. Do you wonder, by the way, so now, compare when Eugene talked last week about the fall of Babylon, that was in 539 BC. Daniel was taken captive in like 605 BC. So he's been a captive over 60 years. When he opens those windows, prays to God 3 times a day, facing his home, do you think at any point he might have asked God, can you please set me free? Can I please go home, like to my people? Can you remind me what my native land feels like? Can I be in that home, in those gardens with my people, your people? And every single one, I don't know how many times he prayed that. Would you? You're in captivity. Do you think you might have asked God at some point, God, can you set me free? If he did, every single one of those times, God perfectly, lovingly, faithfully, and gently told him, no, it's better for you to be here. That hit me hard when I was like, I never had really thought of that before. When you only preach every couple months, like you can really chew on this stuff. So I've been able to like really wrestle with this and read this over and over and over again. And I just never saw that before. But anyhow, Daniel's crime is they got him. He prayed. Interesting, they also know he prays 3 times a day. They're literally spying on him, right? Like they got binoculars looking at his upper window. They come charging in. Aha! Insubordinate to the king. You're on your knees quietly praying in your house. And that's his crime. That's the best that they can do. Interesting also that even by himself, he was praying on his knees. I wonder if our posture before God matters. I wonder if it matters. I wonder if there's something beautiful and humbling about getting on our knees. I wonder if Daniel knew that the gravity of what he was praying right now and the weight of the decision he was making to disobey, I wonder if he knew what that might cost him. But like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, he quite literally chooses to die on the hill of Deuteronomy 6:4. It says, there will be no other gods before you. I will worship you with my whole heart, soul, mind, and strength. That is it. He says, that's a hill that I will die on. Let's pause for a sec. Church, so you and I, yes, we should die on that hill. What are hills that we die on that maybe we didn't need to die on? What are things that unnecessarily divide the church? I wrote down a handful of them, but I'm curious. Can you, please don't call it like a name, but can you, or point to somebody, but what are things that the church makes too big of a deal of, that we sometimes think God said, don't ever do this, and that's going to be it forever, we're ready to die on it, but we didn't need to die on that hill. Can you give some examples? Say it out loud. Black card. Yes. Get rid of them. My gosh. What else? Worship, right? Man, oh man, the style. That is clearly the kind that God likes, is what we did up here, right? I don't know. What else? Fundraising, right? The church should give more money than we did. Or maybe we shouldn't. Maybe we should trust God. I don't know. What else? Old hymns, right? We need them back. No, we don't need them. Let's get rid of them. Let's divide a church over them. Give me a couple more. Praying. Some people think we should pray more publicly. Some people say it's private, whatever. Have you ever heard of Christians disagreeing about politics? I've heard that happens in some cases. Have you ever heard of Christians disagreeing about should you take medication for your mental health? Oh man, let's divide over that. Masks during COVID, watching R-rated movies, how to baptize. Like, should you tackle the person who baptized you? I think it's great, but whatever. The point is sometimes we pick the wrong hills to die on. Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said there is quite literally one hill we will die on, and they quite literally were willing to die for it. If you weren't here in the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were Daniel's friends, the laws of physics and chemistry were defied. They were thrown into a fiery furnace. Power of the heat and the flames are so strong, it quite literally killed the king's guards who took him in there. These guys come out, not only are they not burnt, they don't even smell like they've been around somebody smoking. It's a big part of my job at school is I have to sniff kids. They smell like weed. We kind of have to catch them and be like, did you smoke? That's a big part. Like we're aware. They're like, no, I was just with people last night. So these guys come out of a darn fire and they don't even smell like it. And the king is going, but it looked like, did I put 3 in there or 4? So something miraculous happened with them. And now Daniel, maybe he's convinced that's going to happen. Maybe he's not. I don't know. I mean, he's putting his money where his mouth is because he disobeys the king. And what we're going to see for this last slide, where I want to end the morning, is this persecution ends up revealing God's salvation. So we're in verse 14. We're going to go from there till the end of the chapter here. When the king heard these words, when these guys come and snitch, when they're like, just so you know, we got him. We saw Daniel doing this. And the king hears this. And I think maybe number one, he realized he got tricked. And if you're praying to somebody who should get tricked, that's probably a silly person or thing to pray to, right? The king, I wonder if the king had this epiphany here, where he realized, I'm telling them to pray to me, and they played me. That makes you a pretty lousy God. That's easy for us to kind of groan or laugh at, but like we do the same thing, right? We idolize things, man-made things, ideologies, things that are sinking sand, that aren't the solid rock. I do. But now for the rest of the chapter, it's pretty much from the king's perspective. When the king heard these words, he was much distressed, set his mind to deliver Daniel. He was trying to undo his own law. He labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, "Know, O king, that it is the law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed." This is like a teenager coming up to you and say, now technically, didn't you say this? If they start with technically, you know they're trying to play you, right? It happens all the time at my school, sometimes even my home. Dad, didn't you say that you would love us no matter what we ever did? That's when you're like, oh my gosh, like go ahead. Didn't you say you love us more than like physical things? Or didn't you say once that we can buy new objects, but you can never get new kids? Don't you love us more than things? That's when we're like, what did they break, you know? They come up to the king saying, hey king, just remember the technicality is you cannot change the law. You remember that, right? Like we are going to put him in the lion's den, right? All the resources in the kingdom can't rescue the king from this right now. Said he labored till sundown. So because he's a man of his word and because think of the choice he has to make. He's either going to lose the respect of his entire kingdom because they see he breaks his own law and you can't trust him anymore, or he has to take the one trustworthy guy who never lets him down and he has to execute him on something he knows is hogwash. Man. So the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. This is verse 16. The king declared to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." Do you think that counts as a prayer? Did the king just break his own law? I know this much for sure. Here's what he realized. He's realized that he, the king, who, by the way, he told people to pray to him, he realized that he is in over his head, which makes you not God, by the way. He realizes he can't get him out. And it's like he calls in there, may your God, maybe the paraphrase is this, if this God is real, man, now's the time. And a stone was brought and laid in the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet, with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace, spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. He's the king. He can snap his fingers and say, I want peacocks in my bedroom. They'll bring them. He says, I want you to find me some truffles and saute my meat in the truffle. He can ask for whatever he wants. There is nothing that will be denied to he's the king. No form of pleasure is going to be off limits to him. And yet all the resources in the entire kingdom can't buy this man peace. Can't let him fall asleep. You'd think Daniel would be the guy who can't sleep, right? Daniel's in there with the dang lions. And it says, the story doesn't say that. The story says the king was the one who couldn't sleep. That was even just a few chapters ago. Nebuchadnezzar couldn't sleep. He's having these dreams. And, these guys who've got everything at their fingertips, they can't buy themselves peacefulness. Eliot shared that from Psalm 4, where the psalmist says, I lie down and then I rise again, for you, O Lord, sustain me. Pray that for my kids almost every night since they've been teeny little kids, been reminding them that God is keeping their hearts beating while they sleep. It's keeping their minds firing, telling their body to keep working, telling their lungs to keep respirating, to keep pumping air in and out of there while we're asleep. God sustains us. You and I need rest. We can't keep going. We just plop. But God doesn't. Like we sang just a little bit ago, God is working even if we don't see him. I don't know if the king believes it right now, but I believe he's hoping it's true. At the break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? What do you think he expected? He's crying out, like he chose the lions that are in there, right? Like he seems like he's got a good relationship with Daniel, but let's not forget, he conquered Babylon, the most powerful city in the world. This guy's there's probably an edge to him, right? We got a puppy recently, okay? I mean, she's almost 60 pounds, but she's ridiculous and she's cute and she's not aggressive. But let me tell you, so far to my poor wife, she has sprained her thumb, she strained her bicep, she strained her Achilles, she pulled her into a manhole cover, like into the sewer, I'm not joking. She's given everybody rope burns from her stuff, and this is a puppy who's that's just how strong this teeny little dog is, who likes to lick us and eat her treats, right? What do you think a den of lions was meant to do? The king knew this would be a public spectacle. Just imagine what he's afraid he's going to see when that stone rolls away. I can't imagine, because this is obviously wrecking him. And then he hears the impossible. Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. What does Daniel say? Does Daniel say, my faith saved me? Did he say, I told you I was innocent? What does Daniel say? It's in verse 22. First things he says is, my God. It says, my God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me because I was found blameless before him and also before you, O king. I have done no harm. Interesting how Daniel, I don't think it's a shot at the king, but I think it's a perspective reminder. He says, I'm innocent before God and you. But I believe that's what gave him whether you want to call it the courage or the blind faith or whatever it was that led him to say, I will still pray even if it means my own death. He still did it, and he gets thrown in there, and he comes out the next morning, and somehow he's still there. The king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him. He didn't even have hair on him. Now, it doesn't say that, but if you have a pet, you're always zipping yourself. No harm was found in him because he trusted his God. And now ruthless Darius, now he kind of rears his head a little bit. Then the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions. They, their children, their wives, before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them, broke all their bones in pieces. That's why this series is rated TVMA for violence. But that's what was supposed to happen. That's what the king thought he was doing to his most trustworthy friend, the only guy in his kingdom who he actually could say, I'll turn it all over to you. I believe in you. And here's how the whole thing wraps up. Daniel gives credit to God because of this miracle, because of what happens. Daniel can say that it wasn't me. It was not me. My God protected me. He shut the mouths of these lions. So what does Darius do? Friends, that's how you'll know if your ministry, if your personal relationships, if your impact for the kingdom, you can tell if it actually matters for the kingdom or not, because you hear a lot of, he's such a good guy, she's such a good girl. Or do you hear more of the, man, whatever your faith is, that obviously has done something. Darius doesn't say how great of a guy Daniel is. He makes a new edict. He says, I make a decree, verse 26, that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, not before Daniel. He doesn't say, I'm going to hand the whole thing to him now. He says, the God of Daniel, for he is the living God enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed. Darius just saw that they overtook a kingdom. You know what's going to happen to Darius and his kingdom? It's something, maybe not Darius, but his kingdom, they're going to fall to a guy named Alexander the Great, who leads Rome, pushing across most of the world. And then Rome is going to fall, and new kings are going to come, and new things are going to happen. And through it all, there's this promise going back to 2 Samuel saying that I wonder if Darius knew he was even quoting that. He says, there's going to be a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. His dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. Church, this God who saved Daniel from the power of the lions can and will save you from the power of blank. Whatever it is that you have right now, that you brought in this morning feeling like, God, I feel like I've been praying in captivity for 60 years. I feel like you've said no an awful lot. It does not mean God was not with Daniel during that time. He was with him every bit as much there when he said no as he was when he said yes to Darius's prayer when Daniel was in the lion's den. You and I'm certain that what God sometimes does is he builds our faith muscles, he gives us some calluses, he strengthens us through perseverance in difficult times. And he saved it when Daniel needed it the most. He did save him. He did deliver him. Church, he can and will do that with you, for you, because of him, because of his beautiful power, because of his grace, because of his forgiveness, because of all these things that make the gospel so irresistible. That it fills in the thing. You and I, for our posture to be more like Darius, to say, God, I can't solve, I got myself in a mess. I can't solve it. I need you. You ask God and you watch what he does. I want to ask our musicians to come back up. And I want to sing, we get a chance to sing about this beautiful truth. I want to pray for us. And then as we sing these words, think this through. As you don't just sing because you should, right? Maybe it's even a good time to pause and listen. But to say, do you believe that this is true about the God who saved Daniel? God, we love you. And for some of us who are in this room who don't know if we can or will love you yet, would you please show each and every one of us your faithfulness? Would you show us how you have always been there? How you've not for a split second abandoned us, left us to figure out things on our own. Lord, at times you've said no when it's been really painful, and you've done it for what's best for us. At times you've said yes in a situation we thought was impossible. Lord, it's you alone who saves. And our worship indeed belongs to you only. I pray this in the name of the God who shut the lions' mouths.